Ladies and gentlemen, let us now please welcome the arrival of the members of the High Table. Good morning, Ambassador.
Hi. Good morning. How are you doing? How's everything?
Thank you. Good morning, Minister. How are you? Good morning, sir. How are you? Welcome. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? Welcome.
Hey, good to see you.
Oh,
the last day.
Oh, thank you so much. Hello, sir. Welcome. Hello. Hello, sir. Welcome. Ambassador Kimani. Very nice to see you. Welcome.
The woman who has stood all day and night.
Thank you so much. Director.
Everything went out very well.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Why are we all standing? Okay. Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished officials, panelists, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Please, take a seat. Where I come from, we don't usually greet each other with good morning. Normally, we say a beautiful morning to all of you. If the greeter happens to be a lady, a quick-thinking Filipino gentleman would then say, "You are more beautiful than the morning." So on this glorious occasion, I would like to greet all of you and say to all of you that you are all more beautiful than the morning. And a very warm welcome to this high-level event marking the closing and annual awards ceremonies of this year's Global South-South Development Expo. My name is Lucita Jasmine. I'm the head of special events in UNEP's Division of Communications and Public Information, and I am again honored to serve as your master of ceremony. This has been a most remarkable week, full of hard work, great discussions, and sharing of solutions on the theme of building inclusive green economies. Many solutions have been shared, successful initiatives have been presented, and partnerships are being forged. Now, we prepare to close this expo in Nairobi, the first one to be held in the Global South. The momentum that we excitedly came here with has been augmented exponentially by the accrued wisdom shared from unique experiences and networks. We leave here even more excited about the possibilities and with renewed commitment to our hopes and dreams for South-South and triangular cooperation. After what has been a hectic week for all of us, let us now all relax as we hear some closing remarks and go through an awards ceremony, followed by some key reflections of the week from a variety of speakers, plus a special musical performance by UNEP's National Goodwill Ambassador, Susanna Owiyo of Kenya. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to mention one extremely positive outcome of the Expo. It was the successful collaboration among 27 UN agencies, led by our wonderful host, UNEP, and the Secretariat, the UNOSSC. We truly exhibited to the world that the one UN concept is possible. Would you please join me with a round of applause for the staff and leadership of UNEP and the UNOSSC. Thank you. I would now like to introduce His Excellency John W. Ash, President of the UN General Assembly, Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the UN, and Chair of this high-level closing and annual awards ceremony. Excellency, your commitment to South-South and triangular cooperation is very well known and much appreciated. Thank you for finding the time to be here with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now very honored to hand you over to the chair of this closing ceremony, His Excellency John W. Ash. Please, let's welcome Ambassador Ash with a round of applause.
Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, the Executive Director of UNEP, Director General of UNON, fellow colleagues at the head table, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to you all. As I listened to, well, she called herself master, but let me be politically correct and say mistress of ceremonies. As I listened to her with all the accolades associated with me, I had to look around. I wasn't quite sure whether she was referring to me or the Executive Director. I would like to think the latter. But let me just say I'm truly pleased to be here with you for this closing ceremony. And on one thing, the Mistress of Ceremony was quite correct. I do have a bit of association with the topic of South cooperation. Until just a little over a month ago, I was the president of the high-level committee on South cooperation. Prior to that, 5 years ago, I was during my tenure as chair of the Group of 77 in China, I did make the issue of South cooperation central to our chairmanship. So this Development Expo does hold a certain resonance and a personal meaning for me. But let me begin by acknowledging the many participants to this expo and for the host of creative ideas that has so far emanated from it. This expo brought together over 1,200 people from more than 150 member states, as well as partners from the 29 UN system entities and more than 100 private sector, civil society, and academic organizations. Truly, participation has been broad-based, and it involves all the stakeholders that are going to be important not only for South cooperation, but for the larger exercise that we are about to undertake in the UN, namely the post-2015 development agenda. You have showcased a wide array of tested green economy initiatives over the course of the week. Your success stories and your innovations are paving the way to prosperity for all by tackling shared challenges and making sustainable development an accepted and realistic norm. I would be somewhat remiss if I did not thank the Executive Director of UNEP, Mr. Achim Steiner, and his organization for graciously hosting the Expo this year. I would also like to thank the Director General of UNON for her personal contributions and for that of her organization. And I would like to say at this point in time, I'm forever grateful to the Director of the United Nations Office for South Cooperation, Mr. Yiping Zhu, and his team for their vision and dedication in driving the South agenda forward through this annual event. Ladies and gentlemen, developing countries continue to grow in wealth and savings. They now hold more than 5 trillion in reserves. Between 1980 and 2010, these countries increased their share of world trade from about 25% to 47%, with half of that trade taking place among countries of the South. It is therefore evident that South cooperation is having great impact and influence across a range of sectors, including health, energy, economic activity, and trade. It is also worthy to note that the South is attracting significant capital inflows and that some of the emerging economies of the South are beginning to exercise tremendous geopolitical influence. The fact that this expo is being convened in the Global South for the first time is testimony to the growing importance of the South. As never before, Southern countries are supporting one another through investment, technology transfer, and peer-to-peer learning. South and regional groups are meeting at the highest levels, consolidating their influence and impacting the global discourse. They are also strengthening and redesigning approaches to development. In part, these new configurations and partnerships are guiding the way to a new era of development and global economics. Ladies and gentlemen, with each passing year, it becomes more and more commonplace to say that eradicating extreme poverty is now an achievable reality, that in the not too distant future, we will no longer need to count the number of people living on less than $1 or $2 a day. Many are now convinced that this noble goal is within our grasp, and in large part that is because of the growing might of the southern countries and the efforts of their people. Yet the challengers and the efforts of their people, the challengers remains to put in place the policies, programs, and measures to make poverty eradication a reality by creating more cross-sectoral synergies that will ultimately benefit the people of the South in particular, but all people. The theme of this year's Expo, Building Inclusive Global Economies, South-South Cooperation for Sustainable Development, invites us to recognize and act on the fact that society, economy, and environment are inextricably linked, and that each derives benefit from or causes harm to the other. It also highlights the concept that ecology and economy are not two competing and mutually exclusive paradigms, but they can in fact be harmoniously managed in a mutually advantageous way for the benefit of companies, citizens, communities, and countries. Trade with appropriate mechanisms that ensure open markets and allow for fair competition can bring much value added to societies. These are the underpinning tenets of the green economy, the protection of planet and people while ensuring prosperity that is sustainable. And in a way, if I might add, we are at the ideal place for this expo, because this organization, UNEP, has been in the forefront of ensuring a broader understanding and, we hope, an ultimate acceptance of the concept of green economy. On the basis of this definition, there are some critical steps to be taken in the creation of a global green economy. I start with the building of new and strong trading relationships in which new green goods and services will play a pivotal role. From earliest times, trade was central to social and economic growth, and it will be equally important in the green economy as it has been in the brown economy. Second, governments will need to embrace business as partners in the creation of decent jobs, wealth, and development. It is governments that must create the enabling environment through legal, fiscal, governance, and regulatory frameworks so that the business sector can innovate and successfully transition to a green economy. Third, the business sector must step up to the role of greening operations and practices and act with a higher level of social and environmental entrepreneurship, just as they did with the knowledge economy and technology sectors. They must innovate new products that improve the quality of life and transform markets in order to facilitate a viable and vibrant global green economy. Fourth, the business sector must recognize that when the natural resource base is protected, it enables a lowering of the bottom line and an increase in profits, as well as a positive brand recognition. Fifth, societies in which there is greater wealth and disposable income are those in which citizens spend more, thereby increasing economic activity. Since people, planet, and profit are interconnected, ideas such as social entrepreneurship, social corporate responsibility, introducing green matrices into business models, and the valuation of human and social capital actually bring a high return on investment. Hence, the role business plays in protecting people and planet is one of enlightened self-interest, which yields high returns. The sixth step really comes back to governments and connects with our role at the United Nations. Ultimately, it falls to governments acting nationally, regionally, and internationally to evolve and implement policies that ensure citizens benefit from national wealth, that social services are strong and function well, and that the revenues derived from strong and successful businesses and taxation are plowed back into the development field in the form of social services, healthcare for all, proper education for girls and women, as well as boys and men, good housing, and lives of dignity. This is what development is all about. This is what I think you have alluded to in the title of this expo, and for that I commend you. If the South can develop a model of the green economy that has a uniquely Southern DNA, which grows economies while protecting the planet and ensuring the well-being of its people, then it would be well on its way to unprecedented growth and sustainable development, and to becoming world leaders with new models of development. Ladies and gentlemen, at Rio Plus 20, heads of state and government stressed the interconnectedness between environment, economics, and social dimensions of sustainable development. During the high-level week of the General Assembly this year, member states committed to an outcome document that marks the next steps in our development efforts as a global community. This document makes a strong call for a final push to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. Despite our aspirations, we have hard work ahead of us. Here, Southern countries with a common understanding of the shared development challenges can be their own best allies. The outcome document adopted in September also sets us firmly on course to adopt a new development agenda, one with a broadening view that apply to all countries, albeit with different responsibilities. In this regard, the theme of this year's Expo, Building Inclusive Green Economies, South-South Cooperation for Sustainable Development, is fitting in that Southern countries have both the opportunity and obligation to pursue a smarter development course than their predecessors. It is an opportunity because smarter development can yield better and more lasting results. And it is an obligation because this planet and its people sorely need this change in direction. Ladies and gentlemen, at the opening session of your expo on Monday, our Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Jan Eliasson, called on all of us to work together to capitalize on Southern successes and urge us to build bridges, establish partnerships, encourage innovations, and establish sustainable development strategies for scaling up impact together. The concrete solutions we have seen over the last few days illustrate how we are adding tangible effort to what we are saying on the issues. From the promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiency to the limitation of pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, from pollutant greenhouse gas emissions, from sustainable farming and forestry practice to water conservation, these initiatives demonstrate that the protection of the environment is not only a moral imperative, it is also an economic one. With this in mind, let me please take a moment to congratulate you on some of your successes this week. These include your exhibit of more than 70 best practices. You showcase dozens of tested solutions. SS Gate enabled Southern CEOs to launch a multi-million-dollar South Partnership Agreement to produce hydropower in Tanzania, and it facilitated the matching of over 100 solution seekers with Southern providers. The South-South Energy Initiative, led by Ghana, was launched to leverage Southern know-how as a means to help new oil and gas producing countries avoid the pitfalls of the past. We also saw the inauguration of the South-South Technology Transfer Facility for landlocked developing countries, which is designed to strengthen their productive capacity and production to benefit those most in need. We heard the announcement of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, UN Joint Initiative, to raise more than $20 million to train Somali women, nurses, and entrepreneurs, and the 2013 GSSD Expo Carbon Offsetting Initiative was put forth to ensure that the carbon footprint of this expo is offset. Distinguished delegates, in Rio, in the General Assembly, and in other international fora, member states have increasingly recognized the strategic significance of South-South cooperation in the United Nations system. To continue on this path and to deepen our discussions on how to continue improving South-South cooperation, I will convene a high-level event on South-South Triangle Cooperation and ICT for Development in the post-2015 development agenda. I am confident that the solutions you showcased here, the innovative partnerships you formed, and the multi-partnered, multi-agency initiatives you launch at this expo will undoubtedly contribute to this process. Let me conclude by echoing our Secretary General's call for the entire United Nations to, and I quote, think as one, act as one, and deliver as one, end quote, for development. What you have exhibited here at this expo is what the Secretary General called for and member states wanted. For that, I commend the work of our own United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. I look forward to seeing many of you in New York as we chart our way to a promising new era in global development. And I thank each and every one of you, but especially you, Mr. Zhu, for opening our eyes to fresh and exciting ideas as you do every year. Thank you. Let me start by introducing the distinguished persons at this table, beginning with my far right, Mr. Yiping Zhu, who is the Director of the United Nations Office for South Cooperation, Dr. Miriam Shakila, Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Environment and Energy of the Maldives, His Excellency Mr. Wu Jiaqing, Vice Minister of the Ministry of Environmental Protection in the People's Republic of China. To my immediate right is the permanent representative of Kenya to the UN here in Nairobi, Ambassador Martin Kimani. And let me move to my left. We all know and love the Executive Director of UNEP, Under-Secretary General, Mr. Achim Steiner. We all know, of course, the Under-Secretary General and Director General of the United Nations Office here in Nairobi, Ms. Swedi. And sitting to her left is the recently appointed Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Mr. Kitui. And to my far left is the Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the United Nations Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States, Mr. Acharya. Please give them a round of applause. Could I invite the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Environment Protection in the People's Republic of China to give his remarks. Mr. Jiaqing.
尊敬的主席、理事们、先生们，为期5天的南南发展博览会即将胜利闭幕。在此，我谨代表中国代表团，对博览会的成功举办表示热烈的祝贺，对会议主办方联合国环境规划署的精心组织和周到的安排，对大会工作人员几天来的辛勤劳动表示衷心的感谢。博览会的成功举行，再次向世界展示了发展中国家休戚与共、携手奋进的真诚友谊，充分体现了发展中国家相互支持、共同发展的真挚愿望。博览会给人们留下了深刻的印象，那就是关注绿色经济的发展，寻求南南发展合作的解决方案。这一主题贯穿了始终。中国代表团也通过设立中国南南环境合作、绿色使者计划、生态文明与绿色转型论坛，参加南南环境与发展合作图片展览等等方式，积极地探索着解决方案。博览会期间举行的各类论坛，给我们许多的启示，其中最重要的一点，就是发展中国家通过南南环境与发展合作，相互借鉴在相似的发展阶段应对相似发展挑战的成功经验和政策措施，这将有助于发展中国家自主选择和设计适合本国国情的绿色经济发展道路。我们相信，南南合作在迅速发展的过程中，将会在国际事务中发挥更加积极的作用。随着发展中国家合作意愿的不断深化，我们应逐渐地形成并完善更加全面的双边、区域乃至全球性的 南南环境发展合作网络，而南南环境发展博览会就是一个非常好的促进各方理解与互动的对话平台。女士们、先生们，发展中国家需要积极地探索在全球经济与环境治理进程中纳入绿色经济的理念。作为发展中国家的重要一员，中国正在积极以建设生态文明为核心，加快经济发展方式的绿色转型。这些举措不仅是对中国环境发展事业的推动，更是对全球与区域绿色发展的实践和努力。我们希望在今后的南南环境与发展合作进程中，发展中国家能够携手起来，进一步加强多渠道、多领域对话与合作，促进包容性的经济发展，减少贫困，有效地推动社会、经济和环境相协调的可持续发展。谢谢大家。
I thank the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Environmental Protection in the People's Republic of China for his remarks. And I now invite the Acting Foreign Minister and Minister of Environment and Energy of the Maldives, Dr. Shakilo.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Chairman, His Excellency, the Executive Director of UNEP, distinguished panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you. Let me first express my deep gratitude to His Excellency, the Executive Director of UNEP, for extending this invitation to participate in this expo. Thank you, Kenyan government, for the great hospitality. It is indeed a great honor and a privilege to be here today and share our experiences and challenges we face in the Maldives with regard to sustainable development and learn and benefit from excellent ideas displayed in South-South Cooperation 2013 Expo. Mr. Chair, I represent Maldives, a small, vulnerable, yet a proud island nation. A nation that has vigorously advocated for an effective international framework to combat climate change. A nation that has long campaigned for the security of small island states. A nation that has contributed to break the international silence on human rights of climate change. Our voices were not taken seriously enough to draw the collective will to achieve an equitable and inclusive framework for development that takes into account the social, economic, and the environmental dimensions. In our effort to be heard, once again, here I am, talking on behalf of all small island development states, especially the very small island development states, because if our voices are not heard and not addressed in a forum like this, a kind of forum like this would not be complete. So, hear me out, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. If our concerns are addressed through South-South Cooperation Platform, that would be great. And so we call Global South-South Cooperation to see if our voices can be addressed. Today, sustainable development has become the defining issue of our time, and therefore partnerships such as South-South cooperation is central to success in this interconnected world where global development landscape has changed dramatically. We live in a different corporate space where the geography and geometry of donor-recipient relationships shifted from the traditional north to south towards south-north and south-south in a linear, triangular, and in fact even a quadrangular way. Future global partnerships will be significantly molded along these trends as we face post-2015 development agenda and sustainable development goals. This is the right time for South-South cooperation to learn from past mistakes of others and make a difference with fresh strategies, new and innovative measures. Mr. Chair, as we approach target year 2015 for achieving UN Millennium Development Goals, I'm standing here with mixed emotions. While I'm proud that Maldives is the only MDG plus country in South Asia having achieved 5 out of the 8 MDG goals by 2010 and have embedded tenets of sustainable development within our constitution and national development agenda, I'm also apprehensive of our future in the face of enormous infrastructure, social and economic challenges brought about by global myopia. As you know, the true mark of a developed nation is the graduation of that country from LDC status. As a nation, Maldives has borne witness to the trials of graduation based on distortive indices such as GDP per capita income and the use of generalized global benchmarks and indicators to gauge development without due consideration to the structural and institutional weaknesses, social issues, and the complex interactions between resources and inherent vulnerabilities of the small island development states. We graduated from LDC status in 2011. Despite our protests about the ad hoc and unsystematic nature of the UN transition period from LDC to non-LDC status, and despite the fact that we had not met the economic vulnerability index threshold, now there is a looming danger of us being even considered to having achieved MDG 7 just because we have the so-called improved water and sanitation. Mr. Chair, please tell me, how could ODS be stopped to us when our rainwater is polluted due to transboundary pollution, when our groundwater is contaminated, and when our national debt is extremely high, when almost 100% of all our islands are eroding, when we have only 30 sewerage systems and 5 networked water systems to service 194 remote islands, and when our expenditure on importing fossil fuels stand over 36% of our GDP, and when we spend 26 million annually on water relief, and when our trade deficit is 24% of GDP, and when our external debt is at 43%, and when our national deficit is over 20% of the GDP. In the face of such harsh realities, graduation and the resultant loss of access to concessionary finance and preferential market access and trade privileges and ODAs would threaten the progress we have made on MDGs and our ability to deliver on the ambitious national sustainable development targets that we have set. How can we ever expect to be safe from the wrath of geological disasters and external shocks and achieve a sustainable economy and also achieve and sustain economies of scale required to build strong, vibrant economies when our smallness, remoteness, and lack of resources mandate almost total dependency on our biodiversity and world markets? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, surely we should not be punished for our success in one area after we struggle and reach that success. We should be incentivized to reach higher. Yet it appears that we will be left behind, deprived of much-needed assistance. Therefore, while framing of post-2015 development agenda, it is our hope that the case of Maldives serves as a lesson. We believe that the story of SIDS is a cautionary tale of unrecognized and undervalued vulnerabilities too easily lost in the face of global aggregates, which are now leading to economic hardships for all small island development states. It is therefore important for all of us to understand that a truly global sustainable development framework cannot be established without reviewing and reassessing the manner in which the international community conceptualize, implement, and gauge development levels, especially the nuances of small island development states, and also reflecting on the achievements and shortcomings of the MDG processes and consolidating and maintaining continuity of the achievements of MDGs. SDGs should be seen as a continuation of the MDGs, whereby its achievements complement and the gaps reflect the formulation of SDGs and the post-2015 development agenda. It is also not a secret that availability and accessibility to climate finance to prevent dangerous anthropogenic climate change events pale in comparison to what is required, and therefore the intended benefits often evade us. We need more funding avenues apart from ODAs, which anyway falls short on the pledges. In that regard, we are so hopeful of the possibilities offered through South-South cooperation and UNEP's partnership. Such partnerships must ensure that risk mitigation measures are agreed upon and that financial assistances are not forced into silo-type projects that are detached from the sectoral and national priorities and policies. South-South cooperation has an important role to play to identify and establish fitting channels of communication and act as an ancillary to the Global Sustainable Development Agenda and post-2015 Development Agenda to address governance-related issues and to help build robust government institutions and an all-inclusive, gender-responsive, enabling environment that recognize women's role as an integral and an undeniable driver of sustainable development. Mr. Chair, addressing climate change and achieving sustainability needs to be portrayed not only through a scientific lens, but also through a human rights lens. The image that is depicted will be deprivation of fundamental human rights that will demand responses resulting in financial, political, and societal consequences if it is not addressed properly right now. Therefore, in view of the looming threats and in light of the post-2015 development agenda and sustainable development goals, Maldives urges South-South cooperation as well as other related institutions to reinforce and refocus on the inherent link between human rights and climate change so that this integral link is globally assessed and appropriately addressed in a collective, equitable, and holistic manner. Let me thank UNEP and various agencies for having supported us and stood by us always. As I close my statement, it is my dearest hope that UN and UNEP and other UN organizations will not leave any nation behind, and no nation should be left without an avenue towards progression, and that no seeds are left behind. Together, we achieve our dreams of a sustainable green future for us all. I'm leaving here with high hopes. I'm leaving here with ideas because of this wonderful expo that is going on here. I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I thank the acting foreign minister and Minister of Environment and Energy of the Maldives for her statement. And I now invite the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Mr. Kitui, to give his remarks.
Honorable Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I will make very brief remarks, but if I may first thank you, Akem Steiner, and your colleague, the DG Nairobi, for hosting us to this very important event. May I also use the occasion to congratulate those of you who have been able to come to Nairobi at this particularly and uniquely difficult time for this country. The recent debacle at Westgate represents a very dark moment for this country. And for so many of you to come from around the world and attend to this meeting is a very bold statement that the forces that will want to cause anxiety and disunity have been defeated by you being able to do what they wanted to defeat being done. May I, on behalf of the UN agencies based in Geneva, express our strong association with the dialogue on South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation at this critical time when the world is trying to set new horizons beyond the 2015 agenda of the MDGs. I see the spirit of Marrakesh declaration at the G77 of 2003 as maturing in the events that have been going on in Nairobi this week. A declaration that the South could enrich international dialogue about the challenges of development and the paths to the future. I find that interesting because that increased assertiveness and self-assuredness is coinciding with a moment when the South is demonstrating its capacity to contribute to pulling the world out of a sluggish recovery occasioned by deregulated financial markets first and foremost in the West. It comes at a time when, for the first time, according to the World Investment Report, in the year 2012, FDI flows to and between the South accounted for more than 50% of all FDI in the world. It comes at a time when one of the emerging economies, China, succeeded in becoming the second largest economy in the world. And increasingly, the South has managed to shield itself from the extreme consequences of the crisis that started in 2007, 2008. Indeed, the boldness that we see in the statements emerging in the wake of these relatively promising statements, promising indicators, has emboldened some to start talking about decoupling. While it's interesting to be courageous, we have to proceed with caution. First, it is very rewarding for the South to raise its voice. It's consistent with the spirit of the creation of G77 and consistent with the reasons for the creation of the organization that I lead. Secondly, it is appropriate that at this time, in the wake of the failed orthodoxy of what we were thinking as the world view and major economic approaches, that alternatives to the Washington consensus are being generated within the South itself. That we admit the failures of structural adjustment. And if you look at the narrative of what has happened in the developing world, the South, those countries which persevered and kept a developmental state survived the 80s, the 90s, and 80s and 90s far much better than those which rushed into uncontrolled liberalization. And what we are seeing today is a global reemergence and legitimacy of ministries of planning, a return to the developmental state, a staggered rationalization of areas or sectors of economy which have to be managed because of strategic interest in a different way from others. So that we embrace globalization, but the felt experiences of the South inform the narrative of how we are going to liberalize. We at UNCTAD proudly share the spirit of Marrakesh and share the determination and the growing voice of the South in the dialogue about international cooperation. But we also have to be the first to caution that the optimism has to be tempered with the reality of who is doing what at what rate. If you look at the global statistics, while generally the South has been growing steadily, for some of the countries mainly because of a sustained high price of commodities around the world, the reality is that 3/4 of all the trade flows in the South-South over the past 5 years has been concentrated in East Asia. In fact, East Asia accounts even for more than 3/4 of the total FDI movement within the developing world during that period. That means that while we appreciate that models have worked, we have to look at how we can leverage that experience and that benefit to pull up other areas that remain further behind. And particularly in this regard, the reality that LDCs, though registering on average 7% GDP growth, have in net terms dropped further behind the rest of the world, have in net terms had a shrinking share of global trade. They remain the most vulnerable part of the world to challenges of climate change, food insecurity, high cost of trade logistics, uncontrolled urbanization, and political strife. Let the dialogue and pride of place of the South be enriched by an appreciation that we can collectively address the challenges of governance, both economic and political, in the areas that are being left behind, but we can collectively seek to contribute to the collective solutions to challenges that are identified by those countries. We at UNCTAD have been encouraging that the dialogue of South-South cooperation can now be enriched by a new thinking on developmental regionalism, that beyond trade logistics, about simplifying customs procedures, opening up markets to each other, liberalizing the movement of factors of production, there has to be talk about trade alone does not liberate souls. We want to see how to grow the traders also. Commodity trade, particularly extractive commodity trade, can give impressive figures of growth of economies. But the reality that in many of the southern countries that are dependent on commodity exports, there's very limited organic linkage between the commodity production and the social indices of development in the countries. Our dialogue has to be, how do we genuinely domesticate the benefits of growth in real development of the populations? How can we discipline trade to the service of sustainable development? I didn't want to make a very long statement. I just want to urge that the spirit that emerges from this dialogue should embolden South in having the most important contribution on the mosaic that is emerging in New York around the agenda beyond 2015. If the largest concentration of poverty in the world is in the South, the statement of where we want to go from the South must be the starting point of how we get there. And importantly, let not the sense of a growing assertiveness take away from the reality that we are still uniquely interdependent as a world. Traditional sources of financing for development and for poverty eradication remain critically important. The North remains critically important as a source of technology, market, and finance, both for emerging countries and for the less developed among us. Let us find the diversity of voice not an excuse for disengagement, but the basis for new terms and new mutual respect in our engagement. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, for his remarks. I would now like to call on the Secretary General and High Representative for the United Nations Office of the High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states to give his remarks. Mr. Chair.
His Excellency Mr. Joe Nass, President of the 68th Session of the United Nations and Chair of the High-Level Committee, Honorable Ministers on the dais, UNEP Executive Director, UNO Director General, and Secretary General of the UNCTAD, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to address this closing session. Let me begin by thanking our host, the United Nations Environment Programme, under the strong leadership of Mr. Ajim Steiner, and the UN South-South Cooperation Office led by Mr. Iping Zhao for successfully organizing this year's South Nairobi. This Expo has been an affirmation of the growing role of the South-South cooperation. Many emerging economies among developing countries have become important actors in international finance, trade, investment, technology, innovation, and development experiences, while holding the largest assets and reserves in the world today collectively. They are now both providers and recipients of assistance. Under the motto Solutions, Solutions, and Solutions, they have showcased their ongoing initiatives and entrepreneurship together with their commitment to innovative and inclusive South-South and triangular partnerships. They have all exchanged knowledge and good practices towards achieving the transition towards a green path for sustainable development, addressing decent work challenges, agriculture, and food security. The Expo offered an immense opportunity to build mutually beneficial partnerships and relationships. As we approach the 2015 MDG target and prepare for the post-2015, broad-based inclusive partnerships bringing together all development actors, governments, private sector, NGOs, international organizations, and civil society are critical in contributing to meeting sustainable development and poverty alleviation. It has been encouraging to hear the initiatives and commitments to providing assistance to other developing countries in the areas of green growth policies, development and diffusion of clean technologies, renewable energy and efficiency enhancement, sustainable consumption and production, sustainable agriculture development and food security, management of natural resources, climate change adaptation and technical assistance, and regional integration. These are issues of great importance to humanity, and the voices we have heard here are loud and clear. The Global South has arrived, and it will contribute to the global solutions corresponding to its newfound capabilities. Because we are all in this together in this new era, the governments of the North, the South, and all other stakeholders of sustainable development have to work together in a coherent manner. Despite so many challenges, we see that there is optimism in the air, which we must capitalize collectively to benefit us all. Let me emphasize here that many of the solutions introduced and announced here during the Expo have the potentials to bring benefits to LDCs, LLDCs, and SITs, and contribute to the achievement of